Every friendship goes through its ups and downs, right? But for a lot of us, our close friends are like family, and when we have a fight or disagreement, we work it out. That's what we hope would happen anyway. But what happens when the people you trust, the ones meant to care about you most, aside from your family, turn on you completely? I'm not just talking about kicking you out of the group or spreading rumors on social media. I'm talking about the ultimate crime, taking the life of another human being. 16-year-old David Grunwald left his home to visit a friend on the evening of November 13th, 2016. It was a normal Sunday for the teen from Palmer, Alaska. He told his parents he loved them before hopping into his 1995 Ford Bronco and taking his girlfriend Victoria home after spending the day together. He called his parents and told them he was going to drop in on a friend and he would be home before his 9 p.m. curfew. He never made it home. The death of David Grunwald would bring out the worst in people meant to be his friends, boys his own age who never gave anyone a reason to think they could be bad, vicious people. By the end of this case, they weren't David's friends, they were the ones who took his life. David was born on January 8th, 2000 at the Elmford Air Force Base in Alaska. His parents, Benjamin and Edith, were part of the Air Force, and their careers inspired David as he grew up. He loved computers and all things related to technology and engineering, even aspiring to be a pilot in the military when he grew up. He also loved being outside in nature and was talented at downhill skiing. Overall, he was just a nice kid. He was polite, got good grades, and went to church every Sunday with his parents. It's difficult to imagine anyone would ever want to hurt him. On this day, November 2016, David was spending the day at home with Victoria, his girlfriend. As they did their math homework, David's mom cooked them burgers on the grill. After dinner, he drove Victoria home before telling his parents he was heading to a friend's house for a little while. The friends in question was Eric Almendinger, a local kid who had been a close friend of David's for years. Since his house was on the way back from Victoria's house, it wasn't unusual for him to stop at Eric's place. However, David's parents started to get worried when he wasn't home in time for his curfew. He wasn't answering his phone, and they had no idea where he could be. Edith called Victoria and asked what time David left her place, and she said that David had left ages ago. She then called Eric to ask if her son was with him, when he gave her the news that David never arrived at his house. David's parents decided to call the police. Now, the town of Palmer isn't a big place. It's the kind of town where everybody knows each other and all the kids go to the same school. However, it's surrounded by forests and mountains, the kind of natural beauty you expect to find in Alaska. The search started straight away. At the back of everyone's minds, they were all thinking that they had to find David fast, as it would be challenging for anybody to survive the freezing temperatures of an Alaska night at this time of year. David's aunt, Sherry Ruiz, pleaded with the public for their help in finding her nephew. "We are desperate for any information to locate David. This is a living nightmare. We need him home." They searched high and low, and before long they found a clue: David's car, and it had been burnt to a crisp.
Is the burned up Bronco that belongs to David Grunwald.
This was the first indication that something more sinister was going on here. David loved that car. He'd saved up for months to buy it himself. There's no way he would have done this to it. The car was found 21 miles away from Victoria's house, nowhere close to the location he was meant to be at the time he vanished. With no sign of David near the car, people started fearing the worst for him. A reward was put for $10,000 for David's safe return, as the family was desperate for any information about where he could be.
David attends our church, and so he's a part of our family. We're really concerned about him, and we want him to be found.
Support poured in online as a Facebook dedicated to finding David was set, and theorists started to speculate about the case on forums. Then, on December 1st, he was found. And it wasn't good news. They found David some distance away from where his car was found. He'd been severely beaten and died from a bullet to the head. The police were now dealing with a homicide. To the shock of the whole community, it didn't take long for them to make an arrest either. It was Eric Almendinger, the friend who David was meant to visit, but claims never saw him that night. After being unable to establish Eric's alibi on the night David vanished, the police seized Eric's electronics. They discovered through his cell phone's GPS data that he was in the same place David's car was found on the night he vanished. They performed a search of Eric's home, and while the house came up clean, the same couldn't be said for the trailer they kept in the backyard. The trailer, which Eric used like a clubhouse, had a strong smell of bleach inside. Eric was charged with and first-degree homicide. But that wasn't the end of it. In the weeks that followed, more teenagers would be arrested in connection to the case.
We are getting our first look at the 5 teenagers arrested in connection to David Grunwald's murder.
In total, 5 suspects were charged with causing David's death. Eric Armadinger, Austin Barrett, Bradley Renfro, Dominic Johnson, and Devin Peterson were all tried as adults when they stood trial. At first, they were all taken to court together, but as more information about that night came out, they would be tried separately. It was Dominic who took the police to David's remains, left to freeze in the Alaskan wilderness surrounding their small town. However, it was Bradley who would ultimately reveal the details to the police. That night, all 6 boys were hanging out at the trailer at the back of Eric's house, drinking and smoking some of the devil's lettuce. They were normal and pretty chill until Eric realized David had smoked everything and he hadn't even paid for it. This infuriated Eric. He produced a pistol from his house and started beating David over the head with it, and the others joined in. Barely able to walk, they put David into the back of his own car and drove down to a secluded spot on Nick River Road. Bradley claims that as they drove, Austin held the pistol and said he was gonna do this. It was then that he realized they intended to kill David. There, they walked David out into the dense forest, and when they were far out enough, Austin pulled the trigger. They returned to David's Bronco and doused it in gasoline they got from Devin's house, then set it on fire, after they walked away from the scene before catching a cab back into town. Eric, Dominic, and Bradley were later caught on video partying at someone's house, where they spent the night. That was Bradley's version of events, at least. Once the boys were told there was no way they were getting out of this, they all turned on each other. To this day, no one truly knows who pulled the trigger. But why do something so extreme in response to something so small? Well, as we learned during the trials, these guys thought of themselves as gangsters, especially Austin. That wasn't all. During the trial, as all of the boys were being led out of the courtroom, media cameras captured the moment Bradley Renfro threatened the Grunwald family. As you can imagine, none of this made the trial any easier for David's parents. During the trial, they had to watch the boys who took their son's life clowning around, smirking at each other, and kind of treating the whole thing like a joke. They had to see photos of David's autopsy and hear in detail over and over again what happened to their son. None of this has been easy on anyone, Grunwald said to the court. Our hearts and souls have been drained over what our son had to endure in the last couple hours of his life. And although they got the result they wanted, the battle is still ongoing. All trials take time. Even the simplest homicide cases can take years to conclude. If you factor in other charges such as burglary or tampering with evidence, it can take even longer. This was a case with 5 people involved, all of which have been given multiple charges. What made it even more difficult was their age, as the severity of the crime definitely qualified for them to be tried as adults, but this is always a controversial choice for courts to make. That's why to this day, we're still waiting for all of them to be sentenced. In May 2018, Eric Armadinger was found guilty on 8 counts, including first-degree homicide, tampering with evidence, and burning David's car. Bradley Renfro was found guilty of the same charges in October 2019. Dominic Johnson was found guilty of 9 charges, including obstructing the course of justice and for attacking David. Devin Peterson, who was found to play a smaller role in the crime, was sentenced to 6 years for tampering with evidence and had further 3 years added to his sentence for an unrelated illegal substance charge. Austin Barrett is the only other one in the group to be sentenced. He was the only one out of this group to receive a plea deal, but this didn't mean he got off lightly. He was sentenced to 65 years in prison, with a mandatory serving time of 15 years, with 20 years suspended, and further 10 years parole. He'll be a middle-aged man by the time he leaves prison, which is more than can be said for David Grunwald. The rest of the group is being kept in jail until they're officially sentenced, which will hopefully happen sometime this year. Unfortunately, the legal system has been hit badly by the pandemic, and trying to adapt to this new way of living does mean stuff like this takes longer. However, considering how many charges all these guys have been found guilty of, I'd be willing to bet they're going away for a long time. That brings us to the end of today's video. What did you guys think of this case? Do you really think they did this to David over something so dumb? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below.